This American officer underestimated a royal guard, but the response he received turned into a lesson he'd never forget. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson Hayes of the United States Marine Corps stepped through the grand gates of Buckingham Palace in the early morning haze, the cold London mist settling over his perfectly tailored uniform. The polished medals on his chest glinted faintly under the gray skies, each one earned across 25 years of service in the mountains of Afghanistan, the deserts of Iraq, and the unforgiving terrain of the Middle East. He had come to London to attend the NATO Strategic Leadership Summit, but it was clear from the moment he arrived that Hayes harbored a certain skepticism, impatience even, for British ceremony and tradition. As the group made its way through the palace grounds, tour guide Edward Fleming passionately narrated the history, architecture, and deep symbolism of the royal estate. But Hayes wasn't listening. His eyes kept drifting toward the royal guards stationed in precise formation across the courtyard. Clad in striking red uniforms, tall black bearskin hats, and statuesque in their stillness, they struck Hayes as more theatrical than tactical. With a dismissive smirk, he leaned over to a fellow officer and muttered, loud enough for nearby Brits to hear, "Are these guys just here for show? Meant to entertain tourists?" Then, more pointedly, he added, "Back home, our soldiers see real combat. These men look like department store mannequins." The reaction was immediate. A quiet tension swept over the surrounding British officers. Major Oliver Holley, the UK's military attaché, adjusted his glasses and gave Hayes a firm, calm glance. "Lieutenant Colonel," he said steadily, "I served alongside the Royal Guards in Helmand Province. Some of the bravest, most disciplined soldiers I've ever known wore those red coats." Hayes nodded slightly, not out of agreement, but to brush off the comment. He didn't argue further, but his opinion clearly hadn't changed. Breaking off from the tour group, Hayes wandered through the palace gardens and approached a royal guard standing his post, Sergeant William Barrett. Under his towering bearskin hat, Barrett's eyes remained sharp, focused. His posture was flawless. Every muscle held in quiet tension, like a coiled spring trained never to move unless commanded. Hayes began to circle him, eyeing him as if inspecting a piece of equipment. "This rigid ceremonial nonsense," he scoffed. "How exactly does it prepare anyone for the chaos of modern warfare?" Barrett didn't flinch. He stared forward, silent and still. Hayes stepped closer. "Sergeant," he said with authority, "I outrank you. I'm ordering you. Salute me." The garden fell silent. The small group of NATO personnel nearby paused, sensing the brewing tension. Then, in a measured tone devoid of emotion, Sergeant Barrett turned his head just slightly, barely enough to acknowledge, but did not break formation. "Sir," he said, steady and unshaken, "according to the standing orders of the Royal Guard, a soldier on duty responds only to the chain of command. We are explicitly instructed not to break protocol for outside requests while posted. Therefore, I respectfully cannot comply." Hayes stared at him, caught off guard. He had expected immediate obedience, the kind drilled into troops when brass walks by. But what he saw instead was not insubordination, but discipline. Absolute, unwavering discipline. No fear, no defiance, just a man embodying duty. Just then, Captain Richard Wells, commander of the Royal Guard, stepped forward. "Sergeant Barrett acted precisely as trained," he stated firmly. "Our guards aren't just ceremonial, they are active duty combat veterans. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, the list goes on. The discipline you see here is not for show. It's what keeps us alive in war." Hayes didn't respond. He simply looked again at Barrett, silent, motionless, eyes forward. And in that moment, something shifted. A memory surfaced. Himself, barely 19, heart pounding, stepping onto a battlefield for the first time. Back then, orders were sacred. Discipline was armor. He had lived by it, but years of promotions, politics, and hardened pride had dulled that edge. That night in his hotel room, Hayes sat quietly, his hand resting on his chest, on the medals that marked sacrifice, courage, and years of unshakable service. Yet he kept thinking about the look in Barrett's eyes, that fierce, still loyalty. And he asked himself a question he hadn't considered in years. Is discipline just about following orders? Or is it also about honoring your purpose, even when no one's watching? The next morning, Hayes returned to Buckingham Palace. Alone. He walked through the gardens again, this time not with judgment, but with intent. And there, in the same position, stood Sergeant Barrett, unmoving, unyielding. Hayes approached, and this time he didn't circle. He simply stood in front of the guard and bowed his head. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "Your discipline reminded me of something I had forgotten." Barrett, bound by protocol, gave no reply. But there was a flicker, a subtle light in his eyes that acknowledged the gesture. A mutual understanding shared between two soldiers, worlds apart, bound by the same code. The incident never made it into any official NATO report. But within military circles, the story traveled quickly. Because real leadership isn't always measured by rank or medals. Sometimes it reveals itself in silence, in a soldier's refusal to break formation, and in the humility of a man who finally understood why. The Royal Guard's quiet defiance that day didn't just uphold British tradition. It reminded all who witnessed it of the timeless virtues that bind every warrior: loyalty, discipline, and silent honor.